Welcome to the first video in this series introducing the basics of reading Western musical notation. This video will focus on how to read the staff, which is the primary organizational system behind how Western musical notation is written. Now, learning to read the staff is often analogized as learning a brand new language, and there are some similarities to learning languages, namely directionality. When you learn how to read English for the first time, the first thing that you need to make yourselves aware of is that English is read from left to right, and if you are a native English speaker and reader, you're going to feel right at home as music is read starting from the top left part of the staff going towards the top right before skipping to the next line. But this will be covered at the end of the video. Next, in the same way that you would learn how to read the alphabet or the written system of a language, the next thing to familiarize ourselves with are the two different types of notation that we find contained within the staff. And the first of these notations are simply what we call notes, the overwhelming majority of which we can see in the staff here. And it should be noted that this video is oriented from a vocal musician's perspective, and so when we refer to musicians performing, we are going to use the word sing, but of course, if you are an instrumentalist, you can simply substitute play for here as well. Now, notes communicate two different pieces of information about when singers are supposed to sing. The first of which is how long or how short a singer is supposed to hold a note for, and this is what we call the rhythm that is communicated from notes. And the other piece of information is how high or how low a singer's pitch is. For example, if a singer is to sing a very high note, a note that would be on the right-hand side of the piano, this would be at the top end of a staff, whereas if a singer were to sing a low pitch note at the bottom of the piano, it would correspond at the bottom of the staff. Now, obviously, all musicians, singers included, are not going to be singing or playing the whole time, and the opposite of when a singer is singing is when they are resting. So in this case, we don't see too many examples of rest symbols within this particular staff, but any time in music when a singer or musician is not actually performing on their instrument, you would see symbols like this. And since a rest is a communication of not actually performing, the only information that is communicated in rest are simply how long or how short a time a singer or musician is taking a break between the next time when they will need to perform. Now, the details about reading rhythm and pitch will be covered in separate videos. This is simply meant as an introduction of reading the components of the staff. So if this is a little bit confusing, there will be separate videos explaining both the concepts of rhythm and pitch. Now, the important thing when reading this staff is that we need to know that this staff is actually intended for 4 different musicians. Again, this is oriented from the perspective of singers. Now, in the case of singers, depending on how high or how low your voice is, or whether you are a male or female singer, that's going to tell you which component of the staff you actually need to read. So just like how pitches are organized from high to low based on how high or how low they are on the staff, this also applies to the different voices of singers. So in this case, higher pitch voices would be listed at the top of the staff, starting of course with the soprano voices. So if you are a female singer that has a high voice, you would most likely be reading the soprano part of the staff, whereas if you are an alto, you would be a female singer with a lower pitch voice, and you would be reading from the next staff down. Now, as we go down the staff itself, this corresponds to the pitch of singers getting lower, culminating with the basses, of which I definitely am one, reading from the bottom part of the staff. So if you are a male singer like me, your voice type would either be a tenor, which corresponds to males with a high-pitched voice, or you would be a bass, which corresponds to male singers such as myself with a low-pitched voice. Now, the easiest way to actually practice reading the staff is to actually take a look at a piece of music and actually go over how to read the information within the staff. So the first thing that we'll need to become aware of before we go line by line of the staff is how all of the notes and rests are grouped together, and you can actually see that notes are grouped into specific units that are what we call measures, although most musicians commonly refer to these simply as bars, and you can identify the bars based on dividing lines that we see right on the staff here. So this first measure would be measure 1 or bar 1. The measure that comes after bar 1 would be bar 2, and the measure that comes after bar 2 would be, if you said bar 3, congratulations, you understand how to label measure numbers or bar numbers. Now, the complicated part about reading a staff that actually has multiple musicians' parts written on it is what to do when we get to the end of the line. So let's say that you are a high-pitched female singer and you are reading the soprano line and you get to the end of this passage here. Well, what do? Well, you can't actually skip down to this line here because then you would be reading the alto part intended for low female singers, which is why you actually need to go down here. So because the staff actually usually has multiple parts intended for different musicians, each of the parts is grouped together into units that we call a system. So in this case, one unit of soprano, alto, tenor, and bass parts, this would be called the first system. And when you get to the end of the first system, you would find your part, in this case soprano, down on the second system here, and you would continue to read the soprano part in the second system, and then when you get to the end of the second system, you would skip down to the soprano part in the third system, and so on until you reach the end of the notated music. So putting this in writing, when you reach the end of the system, you need to jump to whichever part you are reading in the next system down here. Now, as mentioned previously, this series is intended for beginners, and if you are not completely familiar with reading notes and rest, pitch, and rhythm, don't worry, the subsequent videos will go over the basics of this, but the advantage that vocal musicians have is even if you can't read the actual musical notation system, you should be able to make use of the words, the text that is written underneath the notation system that is used, and in the context of music, these are what we call the lyrics. But again, the intention of this video series is to get you familiar with not just reading the lyrics, but also the rhythmic and pitch information communicated within the staff itself. In the next series of videos, we're going to be focused exactly on that, learning how to read the pitch and rhythmic information contained within the notes and rests of the staff.